So, when you think of body armor, you usually picture Kevlar.
Right, or like steel plates or something.
Exactly. You put it on, it deflects the incoming fire. It's a very logical, very physical defense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
But when you step into the world of modern internet comedy, the thickest, most impenetrable armor a person can wear is actually just, well, absolute chaotic absurdity.
Oh, totally. It's like a shield of nonsense.
Right. And today we're doing a deep dive into how comedians Bobby Lee and Theo Vaughn use these really inappropriate, surreal jokes to hide this very real, very dark psychological terror of silence.
Yeah, the silence is key here.
It really is. And we're decoding all of this from their unstructured, highly viral conversation in episode 657 of the video series this past weekend.
Okay.
So welcome. We're glad you're here for this one.
Yeah, because on the surface, the source material we're looking at, it just looks like two guys throwing out the most bizarre scenarios imaginable.
Just completely unhinged stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But the humor is actually a delivery mechanism. It's this protective shell covering up some incredibly raw truths about the modern attention economy.
And that crushing pressure of algorithmic fame.
Yes. And the terrifying process of forcing yourself to evolve creatively when you're just paralyzed by anxiety.
I mean, I was struggling with this opening, honestly, because I look at this source material trying to find profound insight, but right out of the gate, they establish a baseline that is just completely disorienting.
It really is. They don't ease you into it at all.
No, they start talking about eating fish brains and dodging fictional wars. Like Bobby goes into this whole explanation of omakase dining.
Which is funny because, you listening probably know omakase is a real high-end Japanese dining experience, right?
Yeah, where the chef chooses the menu, but Bobby just falsely claims to Theo that it translates to mom's house in Korean.
Just completely makes it up.
Right. And he describes this hyper avant-garde scenario where he had to eat fish bones and fish brains.
Oh, yeah, the fish brains that were flavored to taste like a potato chip.
Yes, just to appear sophisticated on a date. I mean, what is that?
And the escalation doesn't even stop with the fish brains. They immediately pivot into this hyper-absurdist hypothetical about being drafted into a fictional Vietnam II.
Right, Vietnam too. Because Theo asks Bobby what he would do if he got drafted today.
And Bobby's immediate response is that he'd just spin around in a circle, firing his weapon wildly.
Accidentally taking out his own team.
Exactly. And Theo counters by saying if he died in that war, he'd want to be buried inside a Pontiac Trans Am at his funeral.
Inside a Trans Am.
Yeah, at his funeral.
Okay, so help me unpack this. Because it's like watching an improvisational tennis match where the ball is on fire. Is this nonstop absurdity just shock value? Or is it a specific defense mechanism to avoid genuine vulnerability?
Well, what's fascinating here is that we can look at it as deploying verbal chaff.
Oh, like in military terms.
Exactly. Aircraft release these clouds of metallic chaff to confuse incoming radar, right?
Right, so it creates so much clutter that a missile can't lock onto the actual target.
That is exactly what Bobby and Theo are doing psychologically. By operating in this heightened, almost cartoonish state of ridiculousness.
The fish brains, the Trans Am funeral.
Yeah, all of that. They create a massive safe distance from reality.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because when you're a public figure who is constantly performing, showing your genuine vulnerable self becomes a massive liability.
Oh, totally, because if they attack the real you, that hurts.
Exactly. But if the audience attacks your absurd persona, it doesn't leave a bruise. Because that persona isn't actually you.
I see the logic in that.
Yeah.
They're building a funhouse mirror maze, so the audience, and maybe even each other, can't find the real people standing in the center.
Right, it's very strategic, even if it feels chaotic.
But wearing that heavy of an armor, constantly deploying that verbal chaff, I mean, that has to be exhausting.
Oh, incredibly exhausting. And the source material shows us exactly what happens when the mask finally slips.
Because it does slip. The absurdity breaks down precisely when they start discussing the medium itself.
Yeah, they drop the jokes entirely for a minute.
They really do. And they start talking about a very real, tangible dread they both felt about recording this specific conversation.
They're confronting the algorithmic beast they serve, basically.
Right. Both of these guys admit, with surprising candor actually, that they dreaded sitting down for this recording session.
Yeah, Bobby explicitly states he avoided doing Theo's show for a long time.
Because of the immense pressure to create viral moments, right?
Exactly. The pressure's just always there.
So for you listening, think about the last time you were on a Zoom call for work and nobody spoke for 5 seconds.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
Right. Think about that agonizing, heavy feeling in your stomach. Now imagine feeling that, but knowing a million people are watching you.
And your entire livelihood depends on you saying something hilarious in that exact second.
Yes. Bobby points out that they both frantically rush to fill any dead air with jokes because they are absolutely terrified of the quiet.
And Theo completely agrees. He admits that sitting in silence is incredibly uncomfortable for him, even in his personal relationship.
Which is wild to admit.
It is. He feels this compulsive, almost manic need to fill the void.
So I have to ask, are they actually communicating or are they just panicking out loud together?
Honestly, it's a bit of both. This is the modern creator's dilemma in its purest form.
The algorithmic demand for viral clips.
Yeah, it turns what should be a casual conversation between two friends into a high-stakes gladiatorial performance.
Because they're hyper-aware of the camera.
And the invisible audience of millions. In the algorithmic world, silence is death.
Because dead air means the viewer scrolls away to the next video.
Exactly. So their panic response to that threat is to throw out more absurdity, more noise. They've internalized the algorithm's rules as a shared psychological trauma.
Wow. And I guess that explains the medication aspect they bring up.
Yes, that was a huge reveal.
It really was. Bobby reveals he's been taking 10 milligrams of Lexapro and going to therapy.
Which is a very specific clinical detail to drop into a comedy show.
Right. And he says this combination has helped him stop caring as much about living in the results.
Meaning he's trying to stop constantly chasing the next laugh.
Exactly. But bringing up Lexapro and SSRI, primarily used to treat anxiety and depression, just to chemically turn down the volume of that internal panic.
He's literally medicating himself to endure the pressure of sitting in a room and talking to a friend.
That is so dark when you really think about it.
It is a profound admission of the toll the medium takes. He's actively trying to chemically and psychologically lower the stakes of his own conversations.
Because his brain is convinced that a 3-second pause will destroy his career.
Right, so his nervous system is in a constant state of fight or flight. The Lexapro acts as a buffer, giving him the space to occasionally step out of that survival mode.
And because the algorithm demands this constant bite-sized noise, long-form performance becomes one of the only places where a comedian can actually escape that pressure.
Yeah, the pressure of the viral moment.
Which explains a major career shift they discuss. This deep-seated fear of the algorithmic trap is actively forcing their creative evolution.
Right, because Bobby talks about his first ever hour-long Hulu special coming out in November.
Which is crazy because he's been doing comedy for decades.
Decades, yeah. But he admits he put this milestone off for years.
He was perfectly comfortable just being a club guy.
Right, going to a comedy club, doing his reliable 15-minute act, getting paid and going home.
It was safe.
The brain's natural inclination is to protect a successful formula at all costs. It's efficient, and more importantly, it feels safe.
But he realized that comfort was killing him artistically. So he, specifically, in his words, penned a deal to force himself to burn his old material.
He essentially burned his own boats to take the island.
Exactly. He locked himself into a contract with Hulu so he'd have no choice but to write new jokes.
And he also brings up a new project, The Bad Game Show, coming to YouTube.
Right, as another way of forcing himself into a new, uncomfortable format. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. He is highly successful as a club guy and a podcaster. Why do successful people need to hold their own feet to the fire engineer a massive public crisis for themselves just to grow?
Well, this raises an important question about the danger of the comfort zone. It comes down to the realization that coasting is just failing in slow motion.
Coasting is failing in slow motion. I like that.
Yeah. Bobby recognizes that relying on past success is a trap that leads to obsolescence.
So by artificially creating stakes, like signing a contract for a looming Hulu special,
he forces his brain out of conservation mode and back into innovation mode. He knows his internal motivation isn't strong enough to overcome his anxiety, so he outsources that motivation to a legally binding deadline.
wow, he outsources his motivation. That is so real. And that need to evolve away from hollow algorithmic success is illustrated perfectly by this bizarre conflict they have over a movie poster.
Oh my God, the movie poster story is incredible.
It's so funny, but also so revealing. Theo got Bobby a tiny part in a movie he was working on. Bobby had something like, what, 1 to 4 lines?
Yeah, barely a cameo.
Barely a cameo. Yet, when the promotional poster comes out, Bobby's face is plastered front and center.
Right in the middle of the marketing.
Right. And this highlights a fascinating disconnect, doesn't it?
Yeah, between actual creative merit and digital leverage. The studio wasn't putting Bobby on the poster to honor his acting performance.
Obviously not, for 4 lines.
Exactly. They were exploiting his highly recognizable internet face to game the algorithm and drive clicks.
And the way they handle the conflict over this poster shows just how warped their professional boundaries have become.
Oh, completely warped.
They don't call an agent. They don't send a polite email.
No, they literally pull out a phone and FaceTime David Spade,
who was also involved in the movie, right there on the recording, demanding to know who was responsible for the poster.
And it gets crazier, because Spade admits that when Theo's team initially reached out to him about the issue, Spade texted Theo a secret password.
A password?
Yeah, to try and save him from having to do an interview and deal with the controversy on camera.
The inclusion of a secret password is incredibly telling here.
It exposes a broken professional ecosystem where everything is considered potential content.
Right, because if you or I have an issue with a colleague in a traditional job, we go to HR.
But for content creators, professional conflict is just another opportunity for engagement.
It's all content.
Exactly. Spade knows that Theo is a part of that machine, and the password is a desperate attempt to maintain a private boundary in an industry that demands total public consumption.
It's so wild. And we see this desperate need to break out of the safe, comfortable patterns extending into the actual topics they choose to discuss.
Yeah, because evolving creatively means tackling harder, traditionally thorny topics.
But these still wear that thick, absurdist armor we talked about earlier to do it.
They approach the third rails of society, like race and generational trauma, but they use a highly distorted comedic lens.
They're essentially conducting high-wire acts over incredibly dangerous territory.
Using extreme caricatures as their balancing pole.
Right. Like Theo launches into this incredibly convoluted story about his stepdad, a veteran he calls Charlie.
Yeah, and according to Theo, Charlie carried a lot of trauma from the Vietnam War.
And decades later, Charlie walks into a local Chinese buffet with the wildly offensive name Yellow Belly.
Yellow Belly, yeah.
He finds a young busboy working there named Clark, and Charlie proceeds to emotionally apologize to Clark for the entire Vietnam War.
And Bobby immediately pushes back on this.
He does. He attacks the geographic ignorance of apologizing for a war in Southeast Asia to a likely Chinese busboy working at a buffet.
He just refuses to let the premise sit there.
Right. And I have to wonder about the underlying motive here. When Theo tells the Yellow Belly story, is he genuinely trying to make a poignant point about a veteran clumsily trying to heal his trauma? Or is he strategically throwing out a highly offensive premise just to bait Bobby into a reaction?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanics of the joke suggest it's a deliberate sandbox designed for provocation.
Okay, sandbox.
Yeah, Theo creates a fictional or heavily exaggerated veteran to embody misplaced white guilt. He uses a stereotypically named restaurant to heighten the offense, knowing exactly how Bobby will react.
So he is baiting him.
He's baiting Bobby, but the brilliance of the interaction is how Bobby uses that bait.
Right, he doesn't just get mad.
Exactly. Bobby doesn't just get offended, he deconstructs the confused white guy trope, legitimately critiquing how society often reduces massive, diverse populations into racial monoliths.
The logic of the joke just collapses in on itself under Bobby's scrutiny.
It's actually a very sophisticated comedic maneuver.
It really is. And they use this same absurdist framework to touch on the physical realities of aging, specifically as it applies to leadership.
Right.
Now, for you listening, I want to be very clear. We are solely reporting on the mechanics of their comedic discussion here. We are not endorsing any political stance whatsoever.
Exactly. Strict neutrality on our end. We're just looking at how they built the joke.
Right. So they riff on the physical decline of aging politicians, specifically mentioning Mitch McConnell glitching or freezing up during press conferences.
And through this comedic back and forth, they float the concept of a strict mandatory age cap of 65 for anyone holding public office.
Which is a huge topic. But notice their methodology. It's a serious, highly debated societal issue. The cognitive fitness of our leadership reduced to a surreal visual of a human being glitching like a broken computer program.
Yeah, they can touch the third rail of political debate because they're entirely grounded by the absurdity.
The armor.
Yes. If someone accuses them of making a harsh political statement, they can simply retreat behind the defense that they were just talking about computer glitches and buffets.
The armor holds.
The armor holds perfectly.
It's a brilliant psychological defense mechanism, but analyzing it reveals an incredibly exhausting way to live.
It sounds so tiring.
Let's distill what we've actually uncovered in this deep dive. Behind the chaotic humor, the fishbrain stories, the highly inappropriate jokes of modern comedy, there lies a profound struggle.
Yeah.
It is a daily battle with deep-seated anxiety, the relentless, unblinking pressure of internet algorithms demanding content, and the necessary, often incredibly painful process of forcing your own creative evolution when all you want to do is hide.
It's like the loudest, most chaotic rooms often exist simply to drown out the quietest, most terrifying insecurities.
That's beautifully said, and I want to connect this back to you listening to this right now. You might not have an audience of millions dissecting your every word.
And you probably don't have a Hulu special contract hanging over your head.
Probably not. But think about the armor you wear. When you feel that pressure to constantly perform in your own life, whether it's projecting success at your job or curating the perfect image on social media.
Or even just keeping up an exhausting persona for your friends so they don't see you struggling.
Exactly. Or when you find yourself rushing to fill those awkward silences in a conversation because the quiet feels too heavy and exposing. Remember that even professional entertainers, people who have reached the absolute pinnacle of their field, are terrified of that exact same quiet space.
They're literally taking medication to handle the pressure of the pause.
They really are. The urge to fill the void with noise, with work, with scrolling is a universal human reflex.
But that frantic filling often prevents us from seeing the reality of our own situation.
It absolutely does. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you step back into your day. Think about that thick armor of noise and absurdity we all construct to keep the world at a safe distance. We treat silence like it's a threat.
Like a void that will swallow us if we don't throw enough words into it.
Right. But what if the silence you are so frantically trying to fill, the quiet that makes you so deeply uncomfortable, isn't a void at all?
What if it's something else entirely?
Exactly. What if that uncomfortable silence is actually the exact space where your next great personal evolution is waiting to happen?